From Straw Tick to Waterbed by Henry Klippenstein. A large slab rock appropriately served as a stepping stone to a 3-room shack for our family of 9. The oldest 4 boys shared the only bedroom, in the center of which stood a large pot-bellied stove. Our youngest brother shared the living room with Ma and Pa, and our 2 sisters had just enough room for a cot at the far end of the pantry. Straw ticks served as mattresses and were annually filled, not with straw, but with fresh hay. In the kitchen, a dipper served as a common drinking cup for the pail of drinking water from the nearby well. So it is not surprising that the transition from a life of straw ticks to that of queen-sized waterbeds, and from a common cup to that of today's obsession with hygiene, was not without its adjustments and embarrassing moments. Ever since World War II, Canadians, with the exception of the more sensible people of Saskatchewan, have subjected themselves to the annual charade of changing to daylight saving time, which is a little like cutting off a foot of one end of a blanket and then sewing it onto the other end. This annual torture has been the source of considerable confusion and countless embarrassing experiences, as I can attest. It was Saturday night, and you know life has passed you by when the most exciting thing you're doing is playing Scrabble with your spouse in a vain attempt to slow down the onslaught of senility. It was 1 a.m. when I finally conceded the game and we wearily trudged up to bed. But this was the weekend of the annual time change ritual, and that now made it 2 a.m. Next morning, when we awoke too late for the 10 o'clock service in our home church, my wife, Louise, suggested we attend the nearer-by church where her cousin was the pastor. I congratulated myself on our good timing when we settled into the back pew just a few minutes before 11. Oh, what a relief! Here was a church with dignity and substance that had not yet succumbed to today's pop culture mentality. The hymns were majestic and the sermon was masterful. After the message, the pastor made a special appeal for visitors to join the congregation in proceeding to the front of the church for Holy Communion. Louise turned to me and whispered, "I don't believe it. They still drink from a common cup." It being flu season, she wasn't sure she wanted to participate. But I was undaunted. This was the Easter season, and a commemoration of the Last Supper seemed appropriate. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. After all, if Jesus could accept a drink from the outcast Samaritan's cup, surely I can share a cup with my fellow communicants. Ordinarily, I would have stepped aside and allowed Louise to precede me, but this was a time for the man to demonstrate leadership. Briskly, I walked up the aisle and was dutifully followed by Louise. Appropriately, I was absorbed in the solemnity of the occasion. I approached the elder holding the bread. I dug deep down into the cavern of the loaf to retrieve a tiny morsel, and now found myself in front of the elder holding the communion cup. I sensed a look of surprise on his face when I dispensed of the bread in the accustomed manner. Now, the elder was a man of short stature, and to my bewilderment he held the communion cup at waist level. What was the meaning of this? Oh well, if humility is the appropriate prerequisite for communion, I was willing to oblige. I stooped deeply, but now to my bewilderment I practically had to wrestle the cup from his hand in an attempt to tilt it just enough to moisten my lips. As I looked up, I noticed that his expression had changed to complete shock and consternation. But the expression on his face was soon transferred to my own when I observed that Louise, who, as usual, had been more observant than I, took the morsel of bread, gently dunked it into the wine, and then ate it. Obviously, I had not done as the Romans do. When the full realization of my faux pas dawned on me, I was devastated. Slowly, I felt the blood creep up the back of my neck until I was sure my face was as red as the communion wine. What do I do now? I felt like backing down the aisle in a vain attempt to avoid the disapproving gaze of the entire congregation. Hurriedly, I walked back to our pew. At the conclusion of the service, the pastor invited all to a fellowship meal in the basement, and he reminded the elders to sit at a special table in order to dispense with some urgent matters. But I had no desire to participate, for I knew what would be the topic of conversation at that table. I tried to console myself with the thought that perhaps the congregation had not noticed this mother of all social and religious blunders. That consolation, too, was quickly dashed when the pastor's wife came up to us immediately after the service and said, "Oh, how nice to have you in our service. Good thing we had communion, or I might not have noticed you." Next morning, when I awoke to do what old men do at 5 o'clock in the morning, I sat up in bed with a start. Louise noticed that I was all clammy and anxiously asked what was wrong. I assured her, no, I'm not having a heart attack, but I just had a flashback of the look on that elder's face when I wrestled him for the communion cup. Greatly relieved, Louise began laughing so hard that the waterbed did not subside for a full 10 minutes.